Are you tired of overpaying for your gold, silver, and platinum bullion coins and bars? Then visit sdbullion.com today. SD Bullion was recently named the 177th fastest growing company in the United States by Inc. magazine. This is because they offer the absolute lowest prices in the industry and follow up with over-the-top customer service. So what are you waiting for? Go to sdbullion.com today and join more than 60,000 happy investors that save money on every precious metals purchase they make.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.
Welcome. You are listening to the Financial Survival Network. I'm Kerry Lutz. Today is October 17th, 2017, a rainy day in South Florida. As always, email us kl@kerrylutz.com. So, is the EU imploding? Austrian election, Catalonia secession. What is next? Well, John Rubino is next to discuss it. John, good morning.
Morning, Kerry. You know what? I hear the rain in the background. That's really peaceful.
Yeah, not when you're trying to do a show, but what can you do? Like, I haven't soundproofed the studio, so...
That's all right. It's kind of a white noise thing. I don't think it interferes with anybody.
Well, maybe we'll filter it. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Yeah. But at least you don't have to worry about rain. You're just going to have to worry about snow soon.
Yeah, there will be precipitation where I am, but it won't be peaceful and white noisy like what you got. But anyhow, as always, there's lots of scary things happen in the world, Kerry. You know, we've been doing this for how many years now, and every time we can open the show with, oh my God, in the last week this happened and this happened. Man, it looks like disaster is on the way. And for some reason, disasters never come from the scary stuff that is happening. So I don't know what to make of what's happening now because it's scary, you know, but we seem to be so resilient with all the money that the central banks are creating and tossing out into the financial markets that it kind of papers over these fairly serious cracks in the global financial system. But most recently, in the U.S., the yield curve is flattening. Now, the yield curve is basically the difference between interest rates on long-term Treasury bonds on interest rates on short-term Treasury paper. When it trends towards zero, in other words, long rates are the same as short rates, that's a sign that the economy is slowing down, and it usually portends a recession. We're now at the point where the past 2 recessions began in terms of the yield curve. So does that mean that the U.S. economy is slowing down, heading into negative territory? Who knows? That's the way it worked the last couple of times. So it's, other things being equal, a scary indicator. Stock prices, meanwhile, keep going up. We're in kind of a melt-up phase right now where we're getting these big gaps up in the S&P 500 and the Dow and occasionally the NASDAQ, which is also a scary thing. That's what happens at the end of financial bubbles, where people who've been resistant to buying and skeptical finally just throw in the towel and say, oh, I need me some of that easy money. And they buy at whatever price. They put in at the market orders with their broker, which gaps stocks up. And you see action like this. Something that's related to that is that the number of people shorting volatility just hit a record. In other words, they're betting that the markets stay placid from here on out. And usually when you get people all on that side of the bet, they're wrong, So we got a very crowded bet shorting volatility, also a very crowded bet buying equities at pretty much any price, and a flattening yield curve. Take those things together and you've got a recipe for recession. At the same time that the Federal Reserve is starting a tightening cycle. So historically, that was, that was news that was going to lead to a bear market and a recession. Whether it happens this time or not is anybody's guess because, as I said, all that money that's being tossed out into the market by not the Fed this time, but other central banks is fungible. You know, if the Japanese central bank creates a lot of money and throws it out there, it doesn't just stay in Japan, it just circulates in the global economy. So the Bank of Japan and the European Central Bank are still in easing mode, and that's liquefying the global economy and leading to price melt-ups. Where that ends is hard to say because it's uncharted territory. We've never had big central banks doing crazy stuff like this before. And it's a fairly safe bet that it leads to where most crazy things lead to, which is some kind of disaster. But whether it's this year or next year is impossible to say. But I tell you, though, just based on history, which is hard to get away from, if you're fairly old like me, you remember all this stuff. You remember the last time it was like this and everything blew up. And then you remember the time before the last time when it was like this and everything blew up. So it's very hard to just say, buy at any price because this time it's different. It's easier for a 22-year-old equity trader to do something like that because he's never seen a cycle before, and the more cycles you've seen, the more locked into the idea that history matters you become.
It does matter.
I'm pretty locked into that. Yeah. So it's really hard to think this is a good thing. Mm-hmm. And it's very easy to see a disaster coming. But you got to recognize that the kind of global inflation in asset prices that we're generating is so unprecedented that we can't necessarily use history to give us trading signals anymore.
Yeah.
And we'll only know how this plays out in retrospect. After it happens, we'll be able to look back and say, oh, well, obviously, when this happened, that was going to happen. But we won't know that until we're looking at it with a year or so of hindsight.
Yeah, well, it's just a question of when. Every boom ends with a bust, right? Correct?
Everyone so far.
Yeah. Has there ever been one that hasn't ended?
Well, not in 3,000 years of history, but maybe this time is different. I suspect that it is different, but in a bad way. That we're going to build up some imbalances that are just so overwhelmingly unprecedented that when they finally are rectified through some kind of market action, that the action is going to be commensurately crazy, So we'll see. We can't know when. And then meanwhile, the financial system veering off into crazy territory is leading politics in the same direction. As you borrow more and more money, the economic system doesn't work for the 99%, and then they vote their frustration. And this past weekend, we saw the Austrians elect a 31-year-old populist. Somebody who they're literally calling him Austria's Donald Trump. And
Donald Trump Jr.
Donald Trump Jr. Yeah, he even kind of looks like one of the Trump.
He does kind of. You're really right about that. He really does.
Yeah.
Oh, it's bizarre. Yeah.
And Austria, Austria's they're not the leader of the EU, but they're fairly influential. And if they close their borders, which is what he's talking about doing.
They speak German. I mean, that says a lot there. The Germans regard them as their inferior cousins.
Yeah, but they were actually the birthplace of the Nazis.
Of Hitler. Yeah, he was Austrian.
And
we forget.
They picked up on that stuff as quickly or more quickly than Germany did. They were a solidly fascist country at one time. So they've got that kind of tendency in their culture. So we'll see where this leads. I don't know whether he'll be able to accomplish everything he would like to accomplish. But one thing that I think is popular enough that he will get it done is curbs on immigration. Because the whole freedom of movement thing and open borders thing hasn't worked. It works beautifully for the 1% because that brings them in lots of cheap labor, lots of people to vote for incumbents, and that's good for them, but they don't live in those neighborhoods and they aren't losing jobs to people who come in and are willing to work for, a pittance compared to unionized labor. And so they don't suffer the downside of free everything, free borders or open borders, freedom of movement, free trade, stuff like that. And there are an awful lot of people in the 99%, who can vote pretty much anybody into office that they want to. And that's what we're seeing now. And you're also seeing separatist movements or secession movements around the world now where people who don't feel like they're part of the country itself, of the main population group, and don't feel like they're being well treated by the central government, are just saying, well,
alienation.
The heck with it. Yeah.
Alienation in your own country. That's a bad thing. That is a fraying at the social bonds. What makes us civilized here, John, It really is. It's dangerous for a country. And combine that frustration with technology, which makes it very easy to envision a region as a separate country. Because, if your people do their internet searches through Google and they watch their movies on YouTube or, some other, what am I thinking of? Oh, Netflix, on Netflix, then how much does it really matter where the central government is located, right? Because they're already kind of global citizens, and they might as well have a central government that's closer to home, that's made up of people who are like them, rather than something that's farther away, staffed by people who are from kind of a different ethnic group or different cultural background or whatever. So it's easy to envision breaking away and becoming your own country. And so you got Catalonia in Spain, which Spain is not going to let happen. They're now taking over the Catalan government. You've got Kurdistan, where the Kurds, who are part of Iraq, have declared independence. And now Iraq has sent soldiers in to take back the oil fields that the Kurds have. And then the Flanders region of Belgium is apparently thinking about breaking away, though it's not clear why anybody would care about that. But there's some good World War I monuments, burials, cemeteries there, but that's about it, right? I mean,
and the funny thing is, it used to be the right in the U.S. that was all about secession. Texas used to be a country, and by God, they could be a country again. You heard stuff like that when the right was very angry about the government.
Yes.
And now it's the opposite. It's California saying, you know what, we don't want to be part of this anymore, and we're going to be our own country. And you see secession movements bubbling up in blue states, liberal states. So I think it's just easy to envision, which just adds another wild card out there, because if you're already dealing with financial troubles and geopolitical problems, you really don't want your richest region to declare itself an independent country and just take off on its own, right? That just makes your life immeasurably harder if you're a country in a complex world. And that's what we're going to see going forward. We're going to see more populists get elected. Obviously, that's a trend that's been in place for a while now, and we're going to see regions, especially rich regions. It's never poor regions that want to break away. It's people who think they're overtaxed relative to the guys that they're helping in their existing country. They want to go off and live their way on their own. We're going to see more of that. At the same time, we see more warfare out there. The world is a very scary place. We sent something called a decapitation team to South Korea just lately. Yeah. And it's not clear what that means exactly, but it's probably some kind of black ops team that is capable of infiltrating and causing trouble in North Korea. Mm-hmm. So,
no doubt. I mean, it's nothing we haven't seen before. On the one hand, people say, well, North Korea, it's so small, what can it do? But, the weapons that they're trying to develop, that they are developing, something's got to be done about it. But I think push comes to shove, it's going to be China that will do it rather than the U.S. That's my gut feel on it, John. I don't really think they want us on their border. They don't want the U.S. on their border.
Well, from a U.S. point of view, it would be so much better if China took care of what was going on by its own border. We don't want to be right next to China either, I don't think. Well, actually, there are crazy people in the U.S. government who would love to have a military base right next to China, but which is the source of the Crimea issue, right?
Right.
Yes. We tried to bring Ukraine into NATO. Mm-hmm. And that's a country that's right on Russia's border, and it hosts a Russian naval base that's crucial to the Russian Navy. Right. And we somehow thought Russia wouldn't react to that, Yeah. And so it's completely conceivable that these same people who are that clueless, who are still in charge, would love to have a unified Korea with nuclear weapons pointing directly at Beijing.
That's insane.
It's insane. It's crazy, and they probably would love to do it. So I don't know. You can't.
Nuts.
Yeah, but scary at the same time. That you got people with that kind of an attitude, with that kind of power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, you do. Yes, you do. So what about gold? It looks like price is going up yet again. It's over 1,300. It's a little dragging today. It's only up $0.50 the last time I looked. It's kind of been going up and down sideways today. But yeah, it's up 10 cents right now. It's still over 1,300. Silver's back over 17. Looks like 1,300 is becoming the floor, huh?
Well, gold is in a modest uptrend from a couple of years ago when it was below 1,100. You know, it's been kind of ticking higher a little bit with the commitment of traders report squiggles in there. You know, and right now the speculators are still really long, so that indicator points towards further decline in the price of gold, just to flush out the speculators who got overexcited when gold started approaching $1,400. So once those guys are flushed out, then it starts going up again. And yeah, it could break 1,400 this time if the new channel stays intact. And I think there's a good chance that it does stay intact, just because there's still so much money being created out and thrown out into the world. And there's still so much instability that's flowing from, you know, the melt up in equities and all the stuff we talked about earlier, you know, the yield curve doing scary things in bonds, and cryptocurrencies beginning the process of destabilizing fiat currencies. You know, fiat currencies are starting to look decidedly old-fashioned now, aren't they?
Really? Huh?
In their current form. They look a little bit like cable TV systems, you know, in the face of Netflix or
Cutting
something,
the cord.
where there's something coming along that just does it better. And so, you know, the way AT&T's cable subscribers are declining year after year, for instance, and Netflix is gaining all that new business. Well, you know, the cryptocurrencies are kind of doing the same thing vis-a-vis old style fiat currencies.
Right.
Because, you know, cryptocurrencies illustrate the fatal flaw in fiat currencies, because cryptocurrencies are created with a built-in limit on their supply.
Right.
And fiat currencies have unlimited supplies at the discretion of these clueless central bankers who just don't seem to understand basic supply and demand economics. So it makes fiat currencies in their current form look extremely old-fashioned. You know, this is old tech.
Yeah.
And so the process is probably going to play out is that fiat currencies are going to look increasingly uninteresting for people who have a little bit of technical savvy or a little bit of understanding of economics. And the beneficiaries will be the best cryptocurrencies and precious metals, with the end game being some kind of a gold-based monetary system that uses blockchain technology as its wealth transfer mechanism. In other words, gold in a vault is linked in some way to a Bitcoin like cryptocurrency, and that's how you move money around. You don't ship that gold from place to place. You move it, you move ownership of it with a mouse click via some kind of a blockchain ledger that allows you to instantaneously move wealth around. And that's a pretty exciting idea, you know, because the gold still exists. It can't be hacked. The cryptocurrencies that you're using as your checking account, effectively, they can be hacked.
They will be hacked.
they can and they will be hacked, but they don't hold all that much value because the gold is a physical reality sitting there. It can't just vaporize the way, you know, Bitcoin can vaporize right now. If the exchange that is holding all your Bitcoins fails or is hacked or is made illegal by the local government, then where do your Bitcoins go? They can just disappear. Or if the internet goes down, then you can't access whatever you've got online. So, you know, if you've got physical gold and silver at home, and then your monetary system is based on physical gold stored in a vault that's super safe somewhere, then all you've lost if there's a hack that takes down the banking system or the power grid for a while is access to whatever you had online. You can still spend your gold and silver coins or the, you know, cash based on it if it's still accepted. And your country's gold is still sitting in that vault. It's still there as the basis of your monetary system. And so you can kind of sort of survive a cyber attack, which isn't necessarily the case right now, as we see with Puerto Rico. You know, their power's been out for a long time, and those people can't access their ATMs. They can't use their checking accounts. And unless they had a ton of cash under the bed or a bunch of gold and silver coins, they are literally broke, flat broke, can't pay for food, can't pay their rent, and
it's interesting because actually Puerto Rico comes under the jurisdiction of the New York Fed, surprisingly enough, and they're shipping out pallets of cash. I guess this is truly helicopter money. If you're in the dire straits and you can't show that you have any means of supporting yourself or you can't get to your bank, I guess they're just going to give you cash, right? So is this a precursor?
Yeah, and there won't be any fraud in that process. That's going to be really nice and clean and simple. Yeah.
Puerto Rico has such honest government, which is why they were a basket case before the storm. The storm might actually wind up being the best thing to ever happen to the island. They get a new electrical grid paid for by you and me and the rest of the fine taxpayers in the 50 states here. They get all these buildings rebuilt to current contemporary storm hurricane standards, building codes. They get roads paved. I mean, this will be the best thing that ever happened. I mean, I'm not being callous here. It's just in the long run, it's like getting invaded by the United States.
Well,
get built up again.
I'll say something that's callous here. It's going to end up, the rebuilding process is going to end up costing more than it would have to move every single Puerto Rican to Kansas or someplace and give them a house that's nicer than the one that they had be blown down, and then turn the island of Puerto Rico into a nature preserve. That would be cheaper than what we're going to do right now.
Yeah, we're going to spend $1 trillion on the place.
Yeah. And the same thing is true of Houston and New Orleans and probably Miami. When the big one hits any of those places, we're going to rebuild it for a cost that is greater than it would be if we just moved everybody to another place where they don't have hurricanes.
Now, there's a thought.
Yeah.
Well, they protested against Vallecas. That was where the Navy had a base set up, and they pretty much practiced fire on the island there. And what they forgot was that the Navy pumped in $300 million a year into the Puerto Rican economy. And, it's a multi-billion-dollar economy, obviously, but I think that's pretty close to dating when the island started going down the tubes. When they pushed the Navy out, the Navy said, hey, you don't want us, we'll find somebody who does. Goodbye. And that's effectively what happened there, John.
Yeah. One of the things we did with Puerto Rico, I think, was imposing a minimum wage on them that they may not have been prepared for. It might have priced a lot of Puerto Rican labor out of the market.
Oh, that always works, right?
Yeah.
Minimum wage.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where there are good arguments on both sides, and most of the people involved in the argument about where to set a minimum wage are reasonable, honest people and trying to make the best of it. And it's just not easy to do because there's a trade-off when you create a floor for the price of workers. You're going to cut off some people who basically just flat out aren't worth this new minimum wage to an employer.
Oh God, yeah.
And
it's true.
And where you set it, where it works is different for different places. The level of the appropriate minimum wage. And Puerto Rico may have been a place where a lower minimum wage may have been more appropriate for their transition to being full-fledged American state. I don't know. But they did seem to start going downhill right around the time that their labor got expensive too, and as you said, the military pulled out. I don't know. This stuff is all very complicated, and the market works it out eventually if it's allowed to work itself out. But when you intervene, federal flood insurance is an example of hamstringing a market mechanism where if everybody had to basically pay the insurance that was appropriate for where they want to live, they would probably end up choosing not to live in these super dangerous places. And the fact that we go back and, I think you and I talked a couple of weeks ago about the Houston thing where Harvey flooded a bunch of houses, but that wasn't the first time. And there are houses there that have been rebuilt 6, 7, 8 times over the decades at a cost 5 or 6 times the value of the house by taxpayers. Right. You and I have paid for that.
Yeah, it's absurd.
And it would have been so much cheaper just to ship those people to another place and give them a nice house over there that's not going to be blown down, or tell them, from now on, you got to pay the insurance on this thing, and you have to fix it if it gets loan down again. Yeah. And then those people can decide what they want to do with their lives based on the costs of different alternatives. You know, we don't, most people don't get to live in Manhattan because Manhattan is too expensive. But we don't have the government saying, oh, we'll ship you into Manhattan and give you an apartment because it's the right thing to do. You deserve it. You don't deserve it. You know, it's an expensive place. If you don't make the money to live there, you shouldn't live there. And it's the same thing with natural disaster propensity and lots of other factors. We should weigh all the options when we're deciding where to live and then carry our own weight, you know, pay our own bills when we decide to do something. And that's something that we're missing now with all the bailing out the big banks. You know, you can start at the top and say, Jamie Dimon should be broke by now. You know, he should have lost all his money during the bubble bursting in 2007. But no, you know, we bailed him and all his buddies out at JP Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs and everything. And they're still rich guys. Well, we shouldn't have done that, obviously. But it's something that starts at the top and then flows all the way through society where we're socializing risk.
Yeah, and privatizing profits. And that is the worst of all possible scenarios. Anyway, check out John's work over at dollarcollapse.com. Sign up for his newsletter. Sign up for our newsletter at financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Twitter feeds at Kerry Lutz and the Facebook page Financial Survival Network. John, we will catch up with you next week.
Thanks, Kerry. Talk to you then.
FSN Radio. It's all about what's next. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and sign up for your free weekly newsletter. You'll also get 3 free reports. The Financial Survival Network. It's all about what's next.